everybody! Today's video is going to be a demo and review on my favorite resin of all time. This is Super Sap CCR by Entropy Resins. I've done a review of this before. It was back in October of 2018, so it's been a pretty good chunk of time, and I feel like my methodology has changed as far as the demos and the reviews, and I feel like this just deserves a new one. So that's what we're going to do today. Right here I have pieces. I've been testing the yellowing since October of 2018 on some of these pieces, and this is a new piece I just cast to do a comparison. We'll get to that in a little bit, but that's what's going on here. Is I've been testing the yellowing for a year and 7 months. That's a really good chunk of time to actually see what's going on with the yellowing, so we'll get in depth about that here in a while. I've gone onto Super Sap's website and printed out some really helpful information, so we'll get to that. And then I also just want to read what's going on the back of the bottles. This is the resin, and this is the hardener. This is not a 50-50 mix like a lot of resins tend to be. This is 2/3 resin to 1/3 hardener, and that's why there's the difference in the bottle size. So I'm going to start with the hardener and just read the stuff that's relevant. Okay, CCR is a water clear, UV stabilized, low viscosity resin designed for casting, embedding, and high build coating applications. One of the reasons I do like it so much is because it's low viscosity. Like it said, here is what the products look like outside of their bottles. I'll usually just pour the resin itself right outside of the bottle, but I wanted you to see what it actually looks like, so I poured it into this little thing. The hardener is so thin that I have to put it in another bottle to measure it properly, because it's like water. It's easy to over pour, and it's more manageable in smaller bottles. So this is what the resin looks like. It's not very thick at all. This is one of the thinnest resins that I've seen, and the hardener is the thinnest that I've seen. So when they say low viscosity, that's what they're talking about. It's a thin product. So there's different hardeners you can get for this product. There is a slow cure and a fast cure. And I usually get I always get the fast cure. Not usually, I always get the fast cure. It has a pot life of 90 minutes. It's tack free in 24 hours. Now the slow cure has a pot life of 360 minutes, and it's tack free after 72 hours. And in case you're curious why you would want a product that cures as slow as this does, it's because resin is a heat reaction. It will heat up, and that's how it cures. And if you're doing high volumes, if you're making a very big casting, if it overheats, it can ruin the project. So if you get a slow cure, it doesn't super heat up. It cures gradually over time, and it doesn't ruin your project. So that's what's going on there. For good adhesion, epoxy bonding surfaces should be clean, dry, and sanded. This is interesting. One of my viewers brought up the idea of using pumps. So if dispensing epoxy with hand pumps, pump 2 full strokes of resin for every 1 full stroke of hardener. If using a scale, weigh to the exact mix ratio. I appreciate that too. It tells you what the ratios are if you want to weigh it. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Thoroughly mix resin and hardener for 2 minutes until the mixture becomes uniform. Scrape the sides and bottom of the cup as you mix. It's pretty standard resin stuff, and if you are not familiar with this, I have a tutorial called Resin Basics for Beginners. Go ahead and check that out and it'll get you up to speed. Okay, large amounts of mixed epoxy left in a container beyond its pot life could melt the container and cause a fire. Like I said, it's a heat reaction. Ambient temperature affects the pot life and cure time of epoxy. For optimum results, use products in a controlled environment, avoiding high humidity and cold temperatures. Okay, if unfamiliar with the product, create smaller test samples before starting. And we'll come back to the temperatures. That shows up in other literature. Okay, so this is the hardener. And like I said before, it's a 2-to-1 mix ratio. And if you're measuring by weight, it's 100 parts to 43 parts. And we'll get there. There's more literature that will cover that. So on this one, for use directions, see the epoxy resin label. Okay. The cost of the product is $70 for a 48-ounce kit, and I'll make sure to leave the link for this and everything else that's relevant in the description box below. So now here is some information that I printed out on the Super Sap site. So there's the resin, like we were talking about. There's the hardeners. You have options, the slow cure and the fast cure. Okay, so specifications. This is for the slow hardener. This is for the fast hardener. As I said, I use the fast hardener. So we have mix ratio by volume, mix ratio by weight, mixed viscosity. I don't really know what that even is. Pot life, it's tack free in this many hours, recommended for full cure 7 days. I wouldn't say that it's ever taken 7 days for my stuff to fully cure. I will say that it takes longer than most epoxies tend to. Usually if I use another product, it will be cured, like full cured in like 24 hours. This, especially if the pourings are thinner, it can take up to 48 hours. So it moves slower than most other resins, even the pot life. I wouldn't say that I've gotten 90 minutes of pot life, like an hour and a half. I would say I would get like up to 50 minutes, but this all depends on the room that you're in, the temperature, all of those types of things. So that can definitely vary. Oh, and this was handy. It's a pouring quick guide. So if you are pouring in weight, then here is your resin, your hardener, everything that you need. It's just a quick guide, as it says. So I think that's a handy thing to have, especially if you're measuring by weight, which I don't do. I tend to measure by volume, so just do what works for you. Application tips. When working at higher temperatures, make smaller pours to avoid excessive exotherm. Epoxy cures slower at lower temperatures. We were talking about that. Small castings will benefit from a post-cure of 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 hours to assure a full cure. Now, when I read this, I thought, oh, I've never done that, and I don't think I'd really do that type of thing to speed it up like that. But I actually have. When it's hot, especially in like the summer months or like the warmer spring months, I'll take my pieces and I'll put them in the garage to cure because it gets hotter in there. So if I want to shave off a good chunk of time, then I will keep the pieces in a hot room. I'll put them in the garage. It works really, really well. For best results, measure the two components by weight within 5% of the recommended mix ratio. Okay, so if you're measuring by weight, just get it as close as you can. Always mix the product for at least 2 minutes, scraping the container to ensure complete mixing. And it's one of those things when you start to get familiar with resin, you can look at it and you can see if it's fully mixed in. There's no like streaks or lines of like product separation. Use products in a controlled environment, avoid high humidity and cold temperatures. I don't really have to deal with the humidity thing because I'm in the desert. Cold temperatures I've noticed don't really affect it as much. Like it takes longer to cure, but I would never say that I've had something not cure properly because it was cold. Amine blush, a byproduct of the curing process, appears as a wax-like film on cured epoxy and is more noticeable in cool, moist conditions. I have never had this problem. I was recently talking with one of my viewers about them having an issue that's something similar to this, so maybe that's what's going on. I had not even heard of that concept before, so that's apparently a thing. All right, if unfamiliar with the product, create smaller test samples before starting a large-scale project. That's always a good idea regardless, especially if you're new to a product or you're new to epoxy. Do something small, do something you don't care about. Don't just dive in and try and like cover a tabletop. You know what I mean? Like get familiar with your product. Oh, okay, here we have optimal working temperature, 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 27 Celsius. All right, so now that we got all that out of the way, we can start to get more familiar with the product. Before I do the demo of this product, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I even learned about it. So some time ago, Art Resin put out a video, and they took a bunch of different types of resin and under laboratory conditions did a yellowing test and then did a graph of the yellowing over time. And Art Resin performed the best. It hardly even yellowed, but this was a close second. And I've never tried Art Resin. It's a bit pricey for me, and from what I gather, it's not a super hard cure. It's like bendable. It's supposed to go on artwork. So I don't know. If I'm wrong about that, absolutely tell me in the comments. I just haven't tried it. So I saw that this stuff performed almost as well and decided to look into it and give it a shot. And it did not disappoint. So these three pieces, this one is brand new. This one I poured resin into yesterday. It's just bezels that have a plain white piece of paper as the background. So this is what it looks like brand new. Now these pieces are the ones I did back in October of 2018. Now the difference between them is that this one got left out in the sun for about 4 months. This one stayed inside in complete darkness. So a year and 7 months ago, I performed this test. This is what they look like now. So there is more yellowing on the piece that had the direct sun exposure. It's not as shiny either, I noticed. It lost some of its lamination, but it got snowed on, it got rained on. It was just out in the elements. So that much yellowing over that amount of time and with that amount of sun exposure, is it perfect? No, but it's not bad at all. This is the piece that didn't have the extreme conditions. That's not bad as far as yellowing goes. And to kind of put it in perspective, so this is the Super Sap. This is Art and Glow. Now the Art and Glow I poured and I left out in the sun. This is 5 months old. They got maybe about the same amount of sun exposure, but this is 5 months old. This is a year and 7 months old. This is a little bit more yellow than the Super Sap. It's impressive, the yellow resistance of this product. Okay, so I have my little cup all marked off and ready for measuring. So I'm gonna do 20 milliliters of the resin and I'm gonna do 10 milliliters of the hardener. So it comes out to 30 milliliters total since it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And under normal circumstances, I mix with a wooden stick. This time I'm gonna try mixing with a plastic knife. One of my viewers was telling me about how wood has a lot of air in it and the air in the wood may actually transfer to the epoxy when you're mixing it and create more bubbles. And that sounds like a pretty reasonable thing. Like that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm just gonna mix with a plastic knife this time. All right, so I'm gonna start with my hardener, and I don't heat up my hardeners and resins or anything like that. Some people will put it in a cup of hot water and it makes it easier to get the bubbles out. I have a vacuum chamber and I normally just do it that way. I don't really like heating up the resin unless the directions specifically say to, and this one doesn't, so I'm not going to. All right. And it's a pretty watery product. I mean, that's not bad at all for the resin side. The resin always is thicker than the hardener in these kits. But yeah, both of these products are super thin. All right, and now I'm going to add in my hardener. Okay, now I'm gonna mix it up a little bit in this container and then I'm just gonna pour it in here and finish mixing it. I just kind of want to get this incorporated a little bit in here. Look at how watery this product is. When it's this thin, there tends to be a lot less bubbles, or fewer bubbles rather, because they rise to the surface a lot easier. That's the big selling point with low viscosity formulas. Now I'm just gonna pour it right in here. Okay, now I'm going to just start to stir it up in my bigger cup. All right, so it's been about 5 minutes and it's starting to look pretty well incorporated. And while I finish stirring it up, I would like to talk about what I don't like about it, so I'm not just like totally biased about this product. It scratches a lot easier than other cured resin pieces, I've noticed. It doesn't have the same kind of self-healing properties that other resin will have. You know, you can dent it and it self-heals, but with this, I feel like it's such a hard cure that it scratches a lot easier. So I don't like that about it. I also don't really like that you have to buy so much at one time. The shelf life is like 2 years, so that's actually really good. It's not the end of the world, but I do feel like if I could buy smaller quantities, I probably would. So yeah, those are my complaints about it. All right, it looks pretty well mixed up. I think that the knife actually really did help with the amount of bubbles. It's a low viscosity formula, as previously stated, so they're not as much of a problem anyways. But yeah, I think not using wood and using plastic instead really did make a difference as far as that goes. Okay, So now that it's all mixed up, I'm gonna go ahead and get ready to pour it into my molds. And I'm gonna pour a thinner piece and I'm gonna pour a much thicker piece. And this is pretty standard stuff if you've seen my other demos and reviews, and then it'll harden up and we'll pop the pieces out and look at how many bubbles are in the finished pieces. So that's what's going on with this. Okay, so now I'm gonna pour a thin piece on this side. And then I'm going to pour a much thicker piece over here. And then I think I have enough left for a medium-sized piece, so I'm going to go and grab another mold real quick. All right, and then I'll just pour the rest right in here. I actually thought of another thing that I wouldn't really say I don't like about it, but it is something you kind of have to work with, is that it's so thin that if you try and use glitters or anything like that, they'll just sink to the bottom of the piece. You have to wait for it to thicken up substantially before you can add like powders or glitters or anything like that. Well, some powders, micas do well, but yeah, glitter, like there's been times I've waited like an hour for this to thicken up enough to put glitter into in order for it to stay suspended. So if you work with glitter a lot and all that, this is something to just be aware of. Oh yeah, that wasn't nearly as much as I thought it would be. All right, so we have, this is actually a thinner piece than the other one. I didn't have nearly as much as I thought. So we have a thin piece, a slightly thicker piece, and a very thick piece. I'm gonna wait a little bit, run a torch or a lighter over the top of them, and then tomorrow we'll come back, pop the pieces out, and check out the bubble situation. So I will see you then. Okay, so it's the next day, and I did something that I said that I was never gonna do and something that I never have done before. I went ahead and I heated up some resin and I poured it into the molds. I just got curious. I just wanted to see how that's gonna be. The main reason I don't like heating up the resin unless a company specifically says to is because I don't know if it's gonna negatively affect the resin. I don't know if it's gonna degrade the formula. I don't know if that's something I just made up and decided to run with. I'm really not sure. I did reach out to the company though. I emailed them yesterday and I asked about heating up the resin. I still haven't heard back, but in all fairness, it's Sunday. We're smack dab in the middle of the quarantine. Things are a little bit weird right now. When I do get an update about that, I will make sure to leave it in the description area of this video to get everybody up to speed. The way I went about heating the resin was I took a cup of hot water and I took the cup full of resin. You remember how we measured in the smaller cup and then moved it into the bigger cup to stir? Well, this time when I moved it into the bigger cup, I took the bigger cup and I put it in a hot water bath like this and then stirred up the resin while it was in the hot water. So at least I'm not heating up entire bottles, but yeah, it definitely was heated. That's how I did it. So now that we got that all sorted, let's go ahead and pop our pieces out of the molds and see what they look like. So the first one I want to start with is the thickest piece that wasn't heated, and that's this one right here. So we're going to go ahead and pop that out. All right, and that's what we're looking at. This is pretty good thickness, and it has not been heated up, so that's how many bubbles there are. It's definitely not crystal clear. It's definitely not bad though. And I can actually do a little test between, remember how we stirred this with the knife? I have a piece that I've made before that's about the same thickness that I stirred with a wooden stick. So I don't really see much of a difference. They look pretty close to the same. Maybe the one with the knife even has a little bit more. I don't know. There's a lot of variables that can happen. Maybe I overstirred, so on and so forth. But yeah, I don't see a really big change between the wood and the plastic. All right. So now we're going to check out the smaller pieces. This is a much thinner piece. Yeah, and there's like none in there. I think that's a piece of debris. There's a couple of bubbles in there, but like, yeah, that's pretty clear. All right, so now we're gonna try the slightly thicker one. All right, so that's the thickness of that one. Yeah, this one is also pretty much clear. There's a couple of bubbles in the middle. So the one that really has the decent amount, we'll call it, is the much thicker piece. But yeah, these are super clear. All right, so now we're gonna check out the pieces that I heated up. I'm super curious about this. So we're gonna start with the biggest piece. Yeah, that's like crystal clear. Yeah, there's a couple of bubbles. There's that just didn't make really good contact with the side, but that's like clear. Yeah. All right, so now we'll look at the smaller pieces, but yeah, I think we kind of have the gist about what's going on here. Also super clear. And this is the thinnest piece, which of course is also super clear. Like I said, I will wait until I hear back from the company and give a little update about if that's even a thing that should be done. But I guess that is that, and it brings us to the end of our video. The results are pretty good. The thicker piece definitely had some bubbles, but it is what it is. Okay, it's me again. I was really checking these out off camera, and I feel like the ones that the resin was heated, I feel like they're more yellow than the pieces that were not heated at all. I don't know if the camera is picking up on it. I think it kind of is. This is the piece that was heated up, and this is the piece that wasn't. And the pieces that were heated just have a more yellow tint to them. I feel like the heat may have negatively affected the formula in some way, like I was concerned about. Yeah, that's something to be aware of. Those pieces are more yellow. I can see that they're more yellow. I don't know how this is, I don't know. I'll make sure to leave an update when the company gets back to me. So yeah, I guess that covers everything I wanted to cover. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the description area below. I thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.